Yo, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening, downloading, and subscribing to the latest edition of the 12 Kyle podcast. I'm 12 Kyle. Check this out. On this podcast, we're going to talk about the GOAT. No, we're not talking about animals. We're talking about the GOAT. The acronym for greatest of all time. Now, the word GOAT gets thrown around a lot in a lot of different areas and genres. So we're going to talk about it, and I'm going to tell you possibly who is the GOAT. More importantly, I'll tell you who isn't the GOAT. So sit back, relax. We'll drop the theme music, and we'll get the podcast jumping. Let's get it. Welcome back. As I mentioned in the intro, we're talking about who is the GOAT. The acronym GOAT, G-O-A-T, obviously stands for greatest of all time. I think we have to really examine who we're actually out here calling the GOAT because I really and truly believe that the term GOAT gets thrown around a lot, and it's really at the point now where it's being misused. It's almost like how people use the term classic, like everything's a classic. Everything can't be a classic, especially when it comes to music. If you listen to some people, there's a classic dropping every week. It doesn't happen like that. Hate to be the bearer of bad news, but it doesn't. Same for the GOAT. If someone or something is the greatest of all time, I guess the first thing you have to do is, if you label something or someone the GOAT, you have to figure out, okay, well, what is this being measured by? How are we determining this? And I think if you start there, then you can really have an idea or a better appreciation for, or even better yet, a case for who or whatever it is that you're labeling as the GOAT. So yeah, you got to start with what it is, the criteria, if you will, for being the GOAT. Is this person or thing the GOAT because it's something that you like or someone that you like? Or are they the GOAT really because they really have no other peers? If you're the GOAT, then you stand alone, and it's pretty much, in my opinion, I think it's not even close as far as a debate. But again, what's the criteria? What are you basing this on? And case in point, I'll give you just a quick example, right? If someone on the Twitter, and I have seen this, says that Kanye is the GOAT. Okay. I mean, like, if you say that Kanye West is the GOAT, if you say you know what, let me break it down even more. If you say he's the GOAT when it comes to hip hop producers, okay. So what's that based on? Is it based on record sales? Is it based on the dopeness of the beats? Is it based on some type of, I don't know, statistical data that you cooked up somewhere? Could you make a case for Kanye West being the greatest hip hop producer of all time? I couldn't, but if you want to try to make a case for him being the greatest, I mean, I could name about 7 or 8 better, but it is what it is. Nonetheless, but that's just an idea of where I'm trying to go here. So just to give you an idea, again, you have to determine what the basis is, what's the criteria, how are you coming up with something to substantiate whatever or whomever you're looking to nominate as the GOAT, right? So that's first thing. Second thing, and I find this so obvious, and everybody walks right past this, but the second question I have is, when you're labeling something or someone as the GOAT, can you be objective? I think that could actually be the first thing that you want to write down, but definitely the second. Can you be objective? How objective can you be? Because unless you're an expert in this particular field of measuring the the GOATness, if you will, it's going to be subjective, but you also have to be objective. You know, how objective can you be? Can you remove all biases? Can you remove all prejudices? That type of thing. So, and I find that most of the times people can't be objective when it comes to this type of stuff, because quite frankly, they want their GOAT to be the GOAT. So whomever that they say is the GOAT is the GOAT, right? And you're not changing their mind. So again, can you be objective? Most people can't be objective. Oh, you know what? Let me take that back. I don't want to say most people. A lot of the people that I come in contact with when you get into these GOAT discussions, they're not objective at all, right? And so that's problematic in and of itself, because who wants to have a discussion with someone who loses all objectivity? I damn sure don't. But hey, it is what it is. So I got to thinking about this discussion, and, it kind of took me back to my first time ever hearing Greatest of All Time. And to me, the greatest of all time, the first time that I ever heard it, came from the mouth of one Muhammad Ali. Ali said back when I was a little kid that he was the greatest of all time. He didn't say the greatest boxer of all time. He didn't say the greatest actor of all time. He said, I am the greatest of all time. And I think he said it right before his fight with Sonny Liston, if I'm not mistaken. If I am, someone please correct me. And this was before he was heavyweight champion. And he goes on to later say that, he had to believe that he was the greatest long before he told the world that he was the greatest. And obviously he goes out and shakes up, and according to him, shocked the world, and he beats Sonny Liston and becomes the world's heavyweight champion in boxing, right? So it got me to thinking, like, boxers. Okay, if you had to think about the GOAT, who's the greatest of all time when it comes to boxing? A lot of people will say Muhammad Ali, because he was everything. He was not only just a great boxer, but he was a showman in the ring. And then outside of the ring, he was an activist. He was a guy who spoke his mind and stood for what he believed in. And his contributions to society outside of his field were tremendous. And so, you could make a case for Ali being the GOAT. You really could. Then there's Mike Tyson. In my teenage years and early teen years, Mike Tyson was the baddest man on the planet. I mean, like, nobody could mess with Iron Mike Tyson. I saw Mike Tyson straight up obliterate cats in the ring. And Mike Tyson, in his prime, was untouchable. I mean, like, if you made it past the third round, that was considered a success when you're fighting Iron Mike Tyson. So yeah, could he be considered the GOAT? To some, he is. Now, he had his troubles outside of the ring, and I'm not gonna get in all of that. But hey, could he be the GOAT? Depends on who you ask. Then I look at a cat like Floyd Money Mayweather, whose record, if I'm not mistaken, is unblemished. He's never lost a fight. And so while he was not in the heavyweight class like Ali and Mike Tyson, undefeated nonetheless. Tyson and Ali had their losses, but Floyd Money Mayweather was undefeated and still is, at the time of this recording, undefeated. He is retired, we think. But yeah, now you can make a case for a dislike of who Floyd Mayweather is as a man. The fact that he has been charged with hitting women, and he's very flashy and flamboyant, and trust and believe if there were no Ali, there'd be no Floyd Mayweather. And that's a fact. But I've heard some people say that he's the GOAT. Is he the GOAT? Depends on who you ask. So yeah, boxing is a sport where, you really can't, make a definitive case. And then you also have to keep in mind that we say greatest of all time. So I think if you are going to measure something by being the greatest of all time, you had to have been around for a while to at least see a lot of what could be considered the great. So if someone considered, Rocky Marciano, then you would have had to have been around to see Rocky Marciano. Personally, I wasn't, so I don't know. But yeah, boxing is a sport where, the word GOAT gets tossed around a lot. Then I started thinking about comedians. There's several comedians who I've heard been called the GOATs. Obviously, for me, the first one that comes to mind, Richard Pryor. Man, listen, Richard Pryor, to me, is one of the funniest human beings to ever walk the face of the earth. Now, Richard Pryor was in his heyday when I was a young kid. I mean, I probably was between 7 and 15, I guess, when he was really, really dominating the comedy. Well, actually before then, but Richard Pryor was he was one of the few comedians that I saw that didn't have to say anything, was just gut-wrenching hilarious. Is it a GOAT? Depends on who you ask. Then there's Eddie Murphy. Eddie Murphy came through in the 80s and was, I guess you could make a case that he really picked up or took off right where Pryor fell off. And not only was he funny, but he was box office. His stand-up shows are legendary. Eddie Murphy is hands down probably one of the most wealthiest comedians. And then going from, it's kind of bugged out for me to see a guy like Eddie Murphy go from Delirious, Stand Up, and Raw to Shrek. That's a bug out for me, because that guy was anything but household. And, now there's a generation of kids who just know Eddie Murphy from Shrek, and they don't know him from Raw or, some of the other stuff that he did that, he probably couldn't talk about today in today's most, PC of worlds, being politically correct. And then there's, love him or hate him, Bill Cosby. Bill Cosby was extremely funny in the 60s and 70s. And then, of course, he had the hit TV show. And one of the great things that people always found about Cosby was that Cosby was able to be funny without cursing. He didn't have any cuss words in his stand-up shows. So again, love him or hate him, no matter what you feel about him. And I'm not going to get into his, exploits and his trouble, but some people feel that Bill Cosby was the GOAT. Then you move closer to nowadays, you look at a guy like Dave Chappelle, and with his success with his stand-up shows and the Chappelle Show, which I think was one of the funniest shows I've ever seen on TV. Dave Chappelle is funny without even trying to be funny. Like Dave Chappelle can roll out of bed and be funny. And then there's Chris Rock. Chris Rock is another guy who just, for me, I just laugh just thinking about something funny he said at any given period of time. So you just never know, and so these guys have been tossed out as the GOATs. And then you look at a guy like Kevin Hart, and Kevin Hart has, he's in every movie and done a gazillion stand-ups, and he's everywhere, and he's with the NBA, and he's doing all of this stuff. And I've heard some people refer to Kevin Hart as the GOAT. I wouldn't, but hey, is he the GOAT? Depends on who you ask. So, there's a right and a wrong, but I think sometimes, again, it goes back to it's all subjective. And can you be objective about who it is that you call the GOAT? Case in point, like, let's take singers, for instance. When was this? I distinctly remember, a couple of months ago when Beyonce had her performance at Coachella. And I remember being on social media and I saw someone make a comment and they said that Beyonce was better than Janet Jackson. And they said not only that, but Janet Jackson stole Beyonce's style. How could Janet Jackson steal Beyonce's style? Maybe it's just me, but didn't Janet come out like 20 years before Beyonce did? Nonetheless, I mean, I think the Coachella performance was phenomenal, but does that make Beyonce the GOAT? It was a great performance. I'll give her props, but is she the greatest of all time? Is she better than Janet? I don't know. I mean, it depends on who you ask. Like growing up for me in the 80s, one of the easiest ways to start a fight amongst people is to get into the discussion / debate / argument. Who's better? Prince, Michael Jackson? That was a surefire way to start a fight or an argument. Talking about Prince, talking about Michael Jackson. Now, I have heard both of them being called the GOAT. And of course, it's bittersweet because, Prince and Michael are no longer with us. And when we would get into those discussions and arguments, man, it would always come down to albums. And then so they would break it down to the two albums and they would say, well, which is better, Thriller or Purple Rain? Now, to me, it ain't even close. Purple Rain is way better than Thriller. That's just my opinion. My opinion. If you think Thriller is better, I don't see how you could think Thriller is better. But hey, you're entitled to your opinion. You could be wrong, But yeah, that was always the discussion. So even with singers, can you be objective? I mean, how do you measure, who's better? Is it based on album sales? I mean, I don't know. If Beyonce outsells Janet, does that mean she's the GOAT? Does that mean she's better than Anita Baker? Beyonce, I like Beyonce. I love her hustle. I respect her hustle. But Beyonce she's not a better singer than Jill Scott. Jill Scott could sing circles around Beyonce, but she'll never be as popular as Beyonce. And is being GOAT is it a popularity contest when you start talking about who's the GOAT? Is it based on someone's popularity? Tone Loc was popular. Young MC was popular. Who else was popular? Hammer was, oh my gosh. Hammer was popular. So, I mean, hey, could you call Prince the GOAT? Depends on who you ask. Could you call Michael Jackson the GOAT? He's often referred to as the king of pop. Depends on who you ask. Now, Prince was a musician. Michael was a singer. Again, can you be objective? What's the criteria? What's the basis? It really just depends on who you ask. Then it goes to sports. I've seen this battle go back and forth. Take the NFL, quarterbacks in particular. Who's the GOAT? Now, I've heard so many people refer to Tom Brady from the New England Patriots as the GOAT. I mean, he's got 5 Super Bowl rings. Now, you came up in my era, you might say Joe Montana from the San Francisco 49ers is the GOAT. He had 4 Super Bowl rings. Who's the GOAT? Again, it depends on who you ask. I could make a case. I could make a case that even with 4 rings, Montana was better because his teams blew out the competition in the Super Bowls. And I don't think Tom Brady ever won a Super Bowl by more than 4 points. I mean, hey, look it up. But, again, it depends on who you ask. Brady's always been surrounded by some type of controversy and, cheating scandals and all of this other stuff, where Joe Cool was, pretty straightforward and straight clean. So, again, who's the GOAT? It really depends on who you ask. And then, of course, there's the NBA. Oh, boy. The GOAT discussion in the NBA, it's really annoying at this point, right? Because I think part of the issue is that, again, as I mentioned earlier, is that we have a younger generation of people who are on social media. And here's where social media has changed the game, right? If social media was around when Ali, beat Sonny Liston, or when Ali beat Joe Frazier in the Thrilla in Manila, or if social media was around when Mike Tyson was knocking cats out in 91 seconds, we'd have a different approach and a different way of describing who the GOAT is. But social media does something. It gives everybody a platform, and it gives people a chance to voice their opinions. And the thing is that now people are listening to other people's opinions. If someone has, 2,000 followers on Twitter, then they have the opportunity for those 2,000 people to listen to what they say. If they've got 100,000 followers, then, a whole bunch of people may take what they say serious and may take it as gold, when that's not the case. Nonetheless, the discussion about the GOAT, obviously, when it comes to NBA fans, you'll have some that say Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is the GOAT. He's the pinnacle, or was the pinnacle in his era. Some will say Bill Russell from the Boston Celtics was the GOAT. And then you'll have some that will give that crown to Earvin Magic Johnson and his 5 NBA championships for the Lakers. And then, of course, you move it a little bit forward, and you get to the 90s, and there was a bald-head guy in Chicago by the name of Michael Jeffrey Jordan. He is often referred to as the GOAT. I mean, 6 NBA finals, 6 championships, never lost the finals, 6 MVPs. I mean, the list goes on and on. Then there's Kobe Bean Bryant, and his 5 NBA titles, who was a bad boy, who was probably the closest thing that we had seen to Jordan after Jordan sat down and hung up his Air Jordans. And then now, of course, nowadays, then you have LeBron James. And, so there's a lot of discussion about, who's the GOAT. I've seen people say on Twitter that LeBron is the GOAT. I don't know how, but I mean, hey, what is it based on? Is it based on his statistics? And I said this the other day, just coming off at the time of this recording, LeBron just lost his 6th finals. He's 3-6 in the finals. So he's got 3 championships. So that's nothing to sneeze at. Phenomenal talent, great person. I think LeBron has done so much for basketball, both on and off the floor. And he's done it in a social media era. I don't know that Jordan could have done what he did, especially with his indiscretions, gambling and side chicks and abortions and all this other stuff that Jordan had in his closet. Nobody knew it. Well, I don't want to say nobody knew about. Some people knew about, not a lot, right? So nonetheless, I think I get why. I can understand why some might refer to LeBron as the GOAT, but you have a hard time convincing people when ultimately they're going to look at the championships. They're not going to look at the statistics. They're going to look at the championships and say, hey, you've been to the finals, and you've won 3. So, and I think this year he made it to his 6th consecutive NBA finals. But as someone pointed out to me on Twitter, they said, well, hey, the Buffalo Bills made it to 4 consecutive Super Bowls. You don't get a trophy just for going. Yo, that's cold. True, but cold. Nonetheless, I had someone hit me up on Twitter, and I apologize. I can't remember. I'm sure they're going to hit me up later and say, hey, it was me. But I had someone hit me up on Twitter and say, look, LeBron is the greatest player that I've ever seen. I never saw Jordan because he played. I wasn't born when he was playing. If you say that, okay, I get it. It makes sense. You never saw, there's YouTube, but you never saw Jordan play. I get it. But again, the GOAT conversation is subjective. Personally, I don't think most of us are qualified to answer who the GOAT is, because you really should defer to someone who saw Bill Russell play, someone who saw Kareem play in his prime, someone who saw LeBron play in his prime, someone who saw Jordan play in his prime, Kobe, and whomever else that you want to throw in that discussion, Magic. But the problem is that a lot of you new generation people, you millennials, you'll say, oh, well, you're just an old head. No, you probably want to refer to an old head on this one, because the old head saw everybody. Fortunately for me, I didn't see everybody. So I get the GOAT discussions. If I had to call a GOAT, I would say Jordan. But hey, I'm a little biased, and I'm willing to admit that. Nonetheless, who's the GOAT in the NBA? Depends on who you ask. And of course, last but not least, we got to talk about rappers, MCs, the GOATs. Now, just to give you an idea, there was one rapper who actually made an album, and it was entitled GOAT. That would be one James Todd Smith, aka Ladies Love Cool James, better known as LL Cool J. So yeah, LL's name gets thrown around as the GOAT, mainly by him and Eclectic, but hey, shout out to E. Anyway, so yeah, LL's name gets thrown around. Who else? Biggie gets thrown around as a GOAT, despite only having 2 albums, of course, through no fault of his own. Tupac Shakur gets thrown around as the GOAT. Jay-Z's name comes up as the GOAT. And then, of course, you got your staples like KRS-One, the God MC, Rakim Allah, I've even heard some people refer to Kendrick Lamar as the GOAT, despite the fact that he hadn't been out 15 years, but they give him the GOAT status. And this may come as a shock to you, but I actually saw some tweets that referred to Aubrey Drake Graham as the GOAT. I don't know how they snuck on my timeline, but I immediately blocked those people. Nonetheless, again, who's the GOAT when it comes to rappers? Honestly, you could make a case, and I would probably debate you on that case, but you could probably make a case for about, I don't know, maybe about 4 or 5 rappers being, the GOAT. Maybe more, but honestly, I could probably punch a hole in any attempts that you would have to establish someone as a GOAT. Just like I said, for Biggie, you could say Biggie's the GOAT. I would say, well, hey, he's got 2 albums. I don't know how you can be a GOAT if you got 2 albums. You can look at someone like LL who's had longevity. I can make a case that LL hasn't had a good album since I was in high school. I'm sorry. You could listen. I make the case, or at least I've tried to make the case for Rakim being the GOAT. Rakim hadn't had a hit in years. So what are you basing it on? Is it based on record sales? Is it based on popularity? Is it based on the ability to spit? Tupac Shakur was one of the most, if not the most influential rapper of all time. Does that make him the GOAT? No. Tupac wasn't lyrical. He doesn't have a hip hop quotable 16 bar. He doesn't. Stop it. But I love Pac, and I love LL, and I love all of the MCs that I mentioned. Rakim the God. It's all subjective. And again, in conclusion, it just really depends on who you ask. Everybody's going to bump for whomever that they think is the GOAT because that's who they really, really like. Think about it. You've never heard someone say, oh, I think such and such is the GOAT, but I don't like him or her. Think about that. So when you say Beyonce is the GOAT, you're probably a member of the Beehive, right? If you say that, Biggie is the GOAT and he's got 2 albums, again, through no fault of his own, and he was tragically murdered, you're probably from Brooklyn. If you say that Tom Brady's the GOAT, you probably are a Patriots fan. It is what it is. We like who we like. We love who we love. In the end, is there such thing as a GOAT? In my opinion, probably not. We have no way of measuring it. We just like people, and we like them a lot. That's it. We like them a lot. And because we like them a lot and they have some credentials that they can stand on, we call them the GOAT. But in theory, until we're old and washed up, then we can decide who the GOAT is. But until then, people are still adding to their legacy. And as long as that is continuing, then it's still up for debate. It's up for good fodder. It's always good for discussions. It's not good for fighting. But nonetheless, it's who we like. And because it's who we like, it matters to us. And somehow, some way, we tend to attach ourselves to these GOAT discussions. And so if I'm attached to Rakim, if you say that Rakim is not the GOAT, then I take it personal. I shouldn't, because you're attacking Rakim, not me, but because I like Rakim a lot. Maybe I feel like you're attacking me. And I think that's where we are. So honestly, we probably should end and should stop using the phrase GOAT, but you'll do it as soon as someone gets their next triple double, as soon as someone, has the next knockout in the first round, as soon as someone sells a gazillion albums, you'll call them the GOAT, because that's just what you do. Ladies and gentlemen, Thanks again for listening to the latest edition of the 12 Kyle podcast. I'm your boy 12 Kyle. We'll catch you guys next time. 5,000.